So in this segment, I'm pretty late to it, but appears to set to slow down attempts to scrap thousands of EU laws. So this one's really important, and it's going to be detrimental, I think, to the repealing of EU laws, because the way the government are doing it is very slimy. But the thing is, they might not get this law actually passed this year. So members of the House of Lords are preparing to slow down attempts to axe thousands of pieces of former EU legislation, depends how you want to define it, with some warning that there is no chance of the bill passing by the end of the year as promised. So the Lords cannot outright block bills, but they can delay them by voting against them, but also adding amendments. Those amendments would be voted on by the Lords and then would be debated in the Commons, which would add a lot more time to a bill. Ministers have promised to review about 4,000 pieces of former EU law that derive from Britain's membership of the bloc and have set a deadline of the end of this year to decide the ones to keep. So the end of 2023, they have to figure out which ones they want to keep. To review all of these pieces of legislation, even if you started last year, would be impossible to fully review. You'd have to look at the impact of each one. Is it worth keeping as is? Should it be amended or repeal it? And what would be the impact of both of those actions? That requires a lot of time for civil servants who have to help with legislation being passed right now, but also stakeholders who might be impacted by the law changes. That all takes time. Chris Fox, the Liberal Democrats business spokesperson in the Lords, told The Guardian, quote, "These regulations are about electrical safety, food standards, water purity. There are thousands of these laws and the government plans to throw them all in the air," end quote. All of these are important for the consumer and for industry. You can't have electrical products constantly shorting, blowing up and or causing fires. Electrical fires are a nightmare to put out. You don't want people becoming sick due to lower food standards. And water, that thing alongside oxygen we need to live. Quote, "There simply isn't enough legislative horsepower to come close to meeting the government's deadline on this," the Lord said. They don't have the civil servants or the end quote. They don't have the civil servants all the time to deal with this. Combined with the fact that a sunset clause means that if the laws are not kept or amended, or they are automatically gone, they are axed. Like, what a dumb move from Mog. So by accident, you can get rid of whole swathes of safety legislation, among other things, without even realising it. Robin Hodgson, the Conservative chair of the Lords Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee, which will play an important role in reviewing the bill, said, quote, "We are quite concerned about what this is going to mean in terms of workload and practicality," end quote. Hodgson adding, quote, "We are in danger of bringing back a lot of EU laws back to the UK, changing them without any parliamentary scrutiny, and that is not what most people understand by taking back control," end quote. We said take back control of our laws. This legislation was made by the Truss administration with Rees-Mogg, so you can argue she was not democratically elected, etc. But this is the way the system is, and Brexiteers have a problem. Like, they do, if the Brexiteers have a problem, they need to call it out. But they have been fairly quiet, claiming, of course, we won't get rid of key protections like holiday pay, but are still not protecting it via legislation. So, Brexiteers have said, don't be ridiculous, not getting rid of these hard-fought protections, but won't protect them in law. So their word means nothing. That's what we know. A politician's word is nothing. Let's be honest now. Under the legislation, which was launched in September, the government must either transcribe thousands of individual regulations into UK law or see them end by the end of the year. So the sunset clause kicks in at the end of the year, so most likely that means the 31st of December 2023, which Parliament is in break or recess, so they will have absolute chaos to deal with when they come back next year, although departments can ask for extensions that run into 2026. Ministers have warned that reviewing each of these rules, which include everything from the right to 20 days holiday pay and the principles behind food safety regulations, would require hundreds of civil servants. They also run into protracted negotiations with the Lords, where both the Labour and the Lib Dem peers are preparing to launch a catalogue of amendments, given the government has the power to set the timetable for voting on legislation. However, ministers could still force peers into a decision whether or not to back the bill by the end of the year. So imagine this scenario. If it's possible for the Tories to get this legislation through by, say, September, which is probably optimistic, even if they force it through, right? But they can try to force it through, even though the Lords can delay a bill up to 3 parliamentary sessions, which looks like one parliamentary session runs normally it takes a whole year, so from spring to spring, from what I've read. But say they get this done by September, right? They pass the legislation, the bill, I mean. It gives them around 3 months to look at the former EU rules they want to keep. Now, departments will already be looking at things they want to keep, but 3 months, and you have to minus holidays, and even if every department is granted an extension, which would be good, it makes the whole thing look pointless, as you're going to have heading into new election territory, where hopefully a Labour government can stop all this. But what about the departments that are run by clowns? You might get rid of tons of important rules that can cause chaos in the next few years, but there would be no real impact assessments done on the changes. The only thing we'd feel the impact is when businesses and other groups take advantage of the rules that are gone. Even ministers might not be aware of the damage. Like, this is crazy. Especially what happens if the Lords do delay it into next year, right? And the legislation says, that the sunset clause is kicking at the end of 2023. Like, you're going to have to amend so much of this legislation already if it goes into the new year. Downing Street insisted on Tuesday that it's sticking to the deadline of the end of the year. A spokesperson said there are no plans to change the 2023 sunset deadline in the retained EU law bill. Next year could be a very grim year for the UK, like worse than now, because if ministers and the PM are not careful, we could lose a lot of our protections. But maybe that's what they want, one final raid on the people of the UK and one huge mess for whoever comes in next. Because honestly, right, if these laws are just taken out by these sunset clauses, we won't really know what's gone until next year. And I don't think ministers will be aware of what's gone. Maybe civil servants will be when they're asked to look at specific things. But honestly, it's going to be wild if massive extensions aren't granted to all departments. What Monk has done here is, he might by accident effectively create his kind of libertarian utopia, which is absolutely terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And this puts the UK in a very, very bad position. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.